Oh, so let's step back in time. We're going to Chicago. It's 1886, specifically the evening of May 4th.
Right.
Try to picture this scene. Haymarket Square, a public space right in the city center, a crowd's gathered, working folks mostly, for a rally.
Mm-hmm. It was a protest, right, against police violence that had happened just before.
Exactly. And the meeting, well, it's starting to wind down. The last speaker's wrapping up. The weather's not great. It's turning colder, windier.
Yeah, people were starting to leave, I gather, heading home.
Yeah, drifting away.
Yeah.
It really seemed like the whole thing was ending, peacefully.
And then, boom, everything changes, just like that. Around 10:30 at night.
Yeah, about then.
A big group of police officers, the sources say over 170 of them, they march right into the square.
Wow, 170, that's a show of force.
Oh, definitely. They form up, march towards the speaker's wagon, and an officer shouts out, tells the crowd, disperse, go home.
And the tension, which must have already been incredibly high after the recent strike violence,
it just snaps.
Erupts. And then the absolute unthinkable happens. A huge explosion just rips through the night air.
A bomb. Someone threw a homemade bomb right into the police ranks.
Oh, my God.
Chaos. Pure chaos. Gunfire starts immediately, coming from, both sides, it seems. People screaming, running, falling.
This wasn't just some random street fight. The Haymarket affair, that's what we call it now. It was more than an incident. It was like a lightning strike that suddenly illuminated these deep, dangerous cracks, right? Running through American society back then, during the Gilded Age.
That's a perfect way to put it, a flashpoint. And the Gilded Age itself was, such a time of contradictions.
How so?
Well, on one hand, you had this incredible economic boom. The U.S. was transforming, becoming this industrial giant like never before, unprecedented growth.
Right. Railroads, factories, immense wealth being created.
Immense wealth.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, all that change, it came at a massive human cost. It created this intense friction, this conflict between, the guys building the fortune's capital and the huge growing number of people actually doing the work, the working class.
And Haymarket somehow captured all of that tension.
It really did. The desperate fight just for basic rights, like, not working yourself to death, the clash between different ideas within the labor movement itself. How should we fight back? Peacefully, radically.
Yeah, and the power of the state, the police, the courts, and the newspapers, too.
Absolutely. The role of the press was huge, and Haymarket just forced all these fundamental questions out into the open. What is justice? What is law? Who's really responsible when things go wrong?
And that, right there, is what we want to dig into in this deep dive. We've got a stack of sources here, historical accounts, some fascinating personal writing from a key figure, academic stuff, even, different takes on how history remembers it.
Right.
Our goal is to really unpack the Haymarket story, look at it from different angles, using what these sources tell us, and try to understand why it mattered so much then and, its lasting impact, on workers' rights, industrial relations, all of that.
It's definitely a story that needs some unpacking. You have to look at the context, the buildup, not just the explosion itself.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's set the stage. To really get why 1886 Chicago was such a powder keg, we need to understand the massive changes happening in America in the decades just before that. What was the country actually like?
Well, the sources, they really paint this picture of just incredible upheaval, a seismic shift, really. Between, say, 1860 and 1900, the U.S. went from being mostly farms, agricultural.
Wait, most people work in the land.
Exactly. To suddenly becoming this industrial powerhouse. Factories, mines, railroads, just dominating everything.
And this wasn't slow, gradual change, was it? The sources suggest it was incredibly rapid.
Oh, absolutely not slow. The scale is just staggering when you look at the numbers and the sources. Like, the value of stuff manufactured in the U.S., it increased more than 5 times over in that period. 5-fold.
Wow.
Just think about what that does to a country. The landscape changes, the jobs change, where people have to live to find work. It completely reorients everything, society, the economy, the whole deal.
And alongside that industrial boom, you get this huge surge in the number of people working for wages. Right, the working class itself.
Explodes, absolutely. The number of people working outside of farms just soared. It went from maybe 1.5 million to, get this, 5.5 million people.
That's a massive increase.
Huge. And a really key point the sources highlight is who these workers were, the majority of them, immigrants. Coming from Europe mostly, looking for work, even if the jobs were, pretty rough.
And where did these millions end up working? Was it spread out or more concentrated?
heavily concentrated. You saw them clustering in the big industrial centers. Think about the giant steel mills, places like Pittsburgh, Cleveland, lumber operations up north, and maybe most importantly, the railroads. Building the railroads took an incredible amount of manual labor.
And the railroads themselves created new centers, right?
Yeah.
Cities popping up or expanding like crazy.
Exactly. Chicago is the prime example. They called it the Queen of the West. Its location made it this massive hub connecting east and west, bringing in raw materials, shipping out manufactured goods. It just ballooned because of the railroads.
So you've got this potent mix,
Yeah.
massive industrial growth, a huge, largely immigrant workforce, and these booming, crowded industrial cities like Chicago.
That's the environment. And then add another layer, the incredible concentration of wealth. While millions were working these hard jobs, a relatively small number of people were getting fabulously rich.
The robber barons, as they were called.
That's them, names we still know, right? Rockefeller, Carnegie, J.P. Morgan. Their fortunes were just astronomical, built often through, let's say, pretty ruthless tactics in a system with very few rules back then.
And the difference between their lifestyles and the lives of the people working in their factories or on their railroads must have been incredibly obvious. Stark.
Oh, completely. The sources really emphasize the hardship for the average worker. Life was precarious, long hours, dangerous conditions. Plus, the economy was unstable, lots of depressions, downturns.
And what happened during those downturns?
Bosses cut wages. Simple as that. One source, talking about Eugene Debs, mentions the huge strike wave back in 1877. Why did it happen? Because railroad bosses across the country decided to slash wages by 25%.
25%. If you're already just scraping by, that's devastating.
Absolutely devastating. It created this constant feeling of insecurity, anger, struggle. You can see why people would start thinking about organizing. Imagine living through the world changing so fast, these colossal fortunes being made, and your pay could just get chopped by a quarter overnight.
Yeah, it sounds like fertile ground for conflict.
Definitely. Fertile ground for labor organizing, and unfortunately also for unrest. You can almost feel the tension building just reading the descriptions.
Okay, so in this pressure cooker environment, workers are trying to organize, but as you mentioned, the sources show it wasn't like one big happy family. There were different groups, different ideas about how to do it.
Very different approaches, yeah. The labor scene back then was pretty fragmented. On one side, you had the dominant unions, which were the craft unions.
Okay, so these are unions for workers with specific skills, like carpenters, printers.
Exactly, skilled tradesmen. They organized just within their particular craft. And the sources described them as, well, generally pretty conservative.
Conservative how?
In their goals, their methods. They were mostly made up of white guys, often native-born Americans. And their focus, a lot of the time, wasn't really on challenging the whole system. Sometimes they functioned more like mutual aid societies.
Mutual aid, like insurance.
Yeah, things like burial policies. Helping members out with immediate needs, which tells you something about how precarious life was, right? Needing a union policy just to get buried properly.
Wow. Yeah, that paints a picture.
It really does. And the sources mention the railroad industry as a classic example. You had maybe 20 different brotherhoods, one for engineers, one for firemen, one for conductors, and so on, all separate.
But nothing for the guys doing the really heavy, unskilled labor, building the tracks, loading the cargo.
Generally, no. Those masses of unskilled workers, many of them immigrants, were largely left out of that craft union model.
So that model had some built-in limitations then, if you're trying to organize the whole working class.
Big limitations. The sources point this out. Their struggles were often just about their specific craft, their specific contract. There wasn't much solidarity between, say, the engineers and the track layers, or even between different skilled crafts sometimes. It made it hard to build, a sense of shared class interest.
And the fact that the workforce was so diverse, immigrants speaking different languages, facing prejudice, that must have made unity even harder.
Oh, absolutely. Frederick Engels, who was observing this stuff, he noted how American bosses were really good at using those divisions, playing different nationalities off against each other to keep workers weak and divided, language barriers, racism, ethnic tensions, huge obstacles to building a unified movement.
Okay, so that's the craft unions, kind of narrow, focused on skills, maybe a bit conservative. Then you had the Knights of Labor. They seemed different, bigger, more ambitious.
Yeah, the Knights of Labor were a huge deal in the 1880s. Their membership just exploded. Went from maybe 70,000 in 1884 to over 700,000 just 2 years later by 86.
700,000. That's enormous.
It was massive. And their idea was much broader. They wanted to include everyone skilled, unskilled, black workers, white workers, men, women. Now, there were still issues and exceptions in practice, but the official goal was one big union for all workers, much more inclusive than the craft unions.
But their leadership, especially Terence Powderly, their head guy, he was very clear about how they should achieve their goals, right? And it wasn't radicalism.
Not at all. We have these amazing excerpts from Powderly's own writing in the sources, and they really show his thinking, especially after Haymarket happened. The Knights officially said they wanted to achieve the elevation of the human race through peaceful methods. They supported things like the 8-hour day, sure, but they very explicitly rejected socialism, anarchism, any kind of violence or radicalism.
And Powderly personally seemed almost obsessed with keeping the Knights separate from the anarchists after Haymarket. His language is incredibly strong.
It really is. He says flat out, I hate the name of anarchy. He felt the Haymarket bombing had tarnished the name of socialism, which he already saw as something different and frankly undesirable compared to the Knights' approach. He just kept hammering the point. The order uses peaceful methods only.
So when people started saying, hey, Knights of Labor, you should help defend these guys arrested for Haymarket,
he slammed the door shut, hard, said he wouldn't sue for mercy for men who scorn us and our methods. He kept saying over and over what happened at Haymarket wasn't done according to Knights of Labor rules or beliefs.
he even singled out Albert Parsons, who was a Knight.
Yeah, he basically said Parsons might be a member on paper, but he wasn't really aligned with their goals, that Parsons would put some other group, presumably the anarchists, ahead of the Knights. Powderly felt zero obligation to defend him unless Parsons was acting specifically under the laws of knighthood.
It sounds like he was genuinely terrified that the actions of a few radicals would destroy the whole organization.
That was his absolute top priority. He accused the anarchists of trying to link themselves to the Knights, pushing their infernal propaganda, he called it, just to get some cover or legitimacy. He didn't just disagree with them. He saw them as dangerous enemies, a foe of the most malignant stamp to the honest laborer.
Wow, malignant stamp.
Yeah. And his biggest fear, public perception. How the newspapers and the bosses would use any hint of connection to anarchism to attack the Knights. He worried that even just passing a resolution expressing sympathy for the defendants would look like the Knights approved of anarchy. He thought that would sweep away all the good work the order had done and hand their enemies a weapon. He was desperate to maintain this image of the Knights as respectable, law-abiding men and women.
You can really feel his frustration with the more extreme elements boiling over in his writing.
Oh yeah, he lets loose. He says their greatest trouble has always been caused by extremists, calls them blatant, shallow-pated men whose wild talk and actions mess things up and lead to crackdowns, restrictive legislation that hurts the ordinary decent members. He practically spits out, no sniveling anarchist will speak for me.
Sniveling anarchist. That's intense. From the leader of the biggest labor group in the country.
It shows how deep that division was, how much fear there was. And his final word on the defendants, it's honestly brutal. He says it's better that 7 times 7 men hang, so 49 men, than for the Knights to be tainted by any association with this element of destruction. He basically said, let them hang, don't associate us with them.
So Powderly's own words give us this incredible window into the pressures inside the labor movement, trying to build this huge inclusive union, but terrified of being dragged down by radicalism, especially with enemies waiting to pounce. He was all about protecting the Knights' reputation, their healthy public opinion.
Yeah, and it's such a stark contrast to the other end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
The anarchists in Chicago who are saying, no, the system is the problem. We need revolution, not respectability.
Right. So while Powderly is focused on peaceful means and public image, you've got this active anarchist movement in Chicago pushing for something much more radical.
Definitely. The sources suggest there were several thousand active anarchists in Chicago in the 1880s. A lot of them were immigrants, especially Germans and Bohemians. And they had influential leaders and newspapers like August Spies, editing the German paper Arbeiter Zeitung, and Albert Parsons with his English paper The Alarm.
And their basic idea, their strategy, was fundamentally revolutionary, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Their core belief, according to the sources, was that direct action, especially confronting the police or seizing control of factories and workplaces, could actually spark a wider social revolution. They weren't looking to reform capitalism. They wanted to destroy it and replace it with a socialist economy, run by the workers without bosses or a controlling state. The existing system wasn't just flawed. In their view, it was fundamentally rotten and had to be overthrown.
To get inside that mindset, Albert Parsons seems like a key figure. His autobiography, which our sources mentioned, sounds fascinating. He wasn't exactly born an anarchist.
Not even close. His journey is pretty incredible. Born in Alabama, 1848, orphaned young. And then, get this, he fought for the Confederacy in the Civil War. As a kid, basically, 13 to 15 years old.
From Confederate soldier to leading anarchist and advocate for racial equality, how does that even happen?
His autobiography apparently lays it out. After the war, he's back in Texas, does some farming, hires newly freed black workers and pays them wages, which was a big deal then, starts a newspaper, The Spectator, and uses it to support Reconstruction, fight for black voting rights.
In Texas, after the Civil War, that must have been incredibly dangerous.
Extremely dangerous. He became a Republican, faced threats from the KKK, got known as a defender of black rights. He said later he was partly inspired by the kindness of an enslaved woman, Aunt Esther, who helped raise him. So his early activism was really forged in that fight against racism and for basic rights in the South.
That experience must have shaped his views on power and oppression profoundly.
You have to think so. He moves to Chicago in 1873, gets right into the labor movement there, joins the Knights of Labor in 76, gets involved in labor politics, even runs for office, and does surprisingly well. He's a delegate at conventions forming early socialist parties, becomes a big voice for the 8-hour day, even the first president of the Chicago Trades Assembly, which was like a citywide council of unions.
So he was a major player in Chicago labor long before Haymarket, a respected leader.
Absolutely. And his autobiography gives us his definition of anarchism. It's really specific and totally different from Powderly's fearful image. Parsons says, anarchy, natural law, is liberty. Simple as that. He sees it as the absence of force, of compulsion, the exact opposite, he argues, of what the powerful claim it is.
So not advocating violence, but opposing force.
That's his argument. He says anarchists don't advise using force. Force is only justified, in his view, to repel the force used by the state and by capital to keep people down.
That's a crucial distinction for him.
It is. And he goes hard after government and law itself. He argues government starts with violence, with theft, basically, and its purpose is to disinherit and enslave people. Government is for slaves, he says. Free people govern themselves. He makes this distinction between man-made laws, statutes, which he calls license permission to exploit, maybe, and anarchy, which he equates with natural law, with true liberty. He calls the human lawmaker a human humbug. Real laws, he says, are discovered, like laws of nature, not invented by politicians.
So for Parsons, the whole legal and political structure isn't neutral or just. It's a tool used by the powerful.
That's exactly his take. He looks at capital, all the wealth, the factories, the land, and says it wasn't earned fairly. It was seized by violence and fraud. And the purpose of government and laws, to protect those special privileges of the people who seized it, the capitalists. He says the main function of capital is just to confiscate the labor product of the workers through the wage system.
And he draws a direct line between capital and the state.
Calls them twins. Says they stand or fall together. For Parsons, the conflict between workers and bosses isn't just some unfortunate problem. It's built into the system. It's created by industrial slavery. And he doesn't think the capitalists can or will fix it. It's up to the workers, the revolutionary proletariat, to overthrow it. He sees this conflict as unavoidable, an imperative necessity that religion or politics can't solve.
It's a pretty deterministic view, then. Conflict is inevitable.
Seems like it. He sees anarchists not as the ones making the revolution happen, but as the ones who see it coming, who prophesy it, because they understand how the system works. And his idea of ending the state isn't just blowing it up. It's when everyone becomes the state, when the whole people participate equally in running things. Then the idea of a separate government just disappears.
Wow. So Parsons' own story is this incredible arc. Confederate soldier, Reconstruction activist fighting for black rights, major labor leader, and then this deeply philosophical anarchist. His writings give this radical justification for opposing the whole system, seeing law and government as fundamentally tools of capital. It's the polar opposite of Powderly's approach.
Completely different worldviews. And these clashes, reform versus revolution, peaceful means versus confrontation, they were all swirling around Chicago, focused on this one seemingly simple demand, the 8-hour workday.
Yeah, the 8-hour day. That fight had been simmering for a long time.
A central demand everywhere. And May 1st, 1886, that date becomes huge.
The first May Day, right. International Workers' Day.
That's the one. It was planned as a day of global demonstrations and strikes for the 8-hour day. And Chicago was ground zero in the U.S. Sources say 40,000 workers walked off the job there on May 1st. A massive show of force.
But things turned violent very quickly after that.
Tragically fast, May 3rd. Trouble flares up at the McCormick Harvester factory. There was already a strike going on there. Strikers clash with strike breakers. The police move in and they open fire on the striking workers.
People were killed.
Yes. The sources differ slightly. On the number one says 4 killed, another says 2 killed, many wounded. But either way, police firing on striking workers, killing people. It just poured gasoline on the fire. Anger spread like wildfire through the city's labor movement.
And the Haymarket rally on May 4th was called specifically because of that incident at McCormick.
Exactly. Anarchist leaders, including August spies, called the rally for the evening of May 4th at Haymarket Square to protest that police brutality.
But interestingly, the sources say the rally itself started out pretty calm. Surprisingly calm, maybe.
Yeah, they make a point of that. It started peacefully. August spies spoke. Albert Parsons spoke. He mentions in his autobiography he wasn't even scheduled, but got pulled in after another meeting, arrived late, maybe 9 p.m. Samuel Fielden was another speaker.
And it was so low-key that even the mayor came and went without any trouble.
Right. Mayor Carter Harrison III showed up, checked it out, saw it was peaceful, speeches weren't too wild, crowd was thinning out, so he figured it was fine, and left around 9:30. Plus, the weather was getting nasty, cold, windy. People were already starting to leave.
Okay, so picture it. A protest rally called after police violence, but it's winding down. People are dispersing. Then the police arrive at 10:30. What happens next?
As Samuel Fielden is finishing his speech, this large group of police, led by Captain John Bonfield, marches into the square. They form up, order the remaining crowd to disperse, declared it an unlawful assembly. Bonfield specifically tells Fielden to stop talking and everyone to leave.
And right then, in that tense moment with the police facing the crowd, that's when the bomb goes off.
That's the moment. Someone, still unknown who exactly, throws this homemade bomb from a nearby alley. It lands right among the police officers.
The impact must have been devastating.
Horrific. The explosion killed one policeman, Matthias Deegan, instantly. Wounded many, many others very badly. And then, immediately after the blast, total chaos. Police started firing into the crowd, into the darkness. Maybe some people in the crowd fired back, just gunfire everywhere.
And the total casualties were high, from both the bomb and the shooting.
Tragically high. In the end, 7 police officers died from the bomb or the gunfire that followed, and at least 4 civilians were killed. Over 70 people injured in total. And police just started rounding people up, over 100 arrests right away.
One source mentioned something specific about the police gunfire.
Yeah, the Reddit source brings up a really grim detail that in the panic and darkness, the police were firing wildly, even hitting their own men. It suggests that only Officer Deegan's death was directly caused by the bomb itself, and the other police deaths came from the chaotic crossfire.
That detail really emphasizes the panic, the lack of control after the explosion. It wasn't just a targeted attack and response.
No, it sounds like absolute mayhem. And the immediate result, a massive backlash against unions, against labor organizing across the city, across the country. That push for the 8-hour day stopped dead. Employers quickly went back to the old 10-hour or even longer days.
And the authorities cracked down hard, maybe not always following the rules.
Sources describe sweeping raids, police hitting homes, offices of anyone suspected of being an anarchist or labor activist, often without search warrants, just busting in. An 8-week shakedown, one source calls it, ransacking meeting halls. They were clearly targeting the radicals, especially the speakers from the rally, and anyone tied to that Arbeiterzeitung newspaper.
And the newspapers, what role did they play right after the bombing?
A huge critical role. Almost immediately, papers everywhere declared it was the anarchists' fault, period. Called it the Haymarket Riot. And the public, already scared and maybe confused, largely bought that story. The reporting got more and more sensational.
Sensational how? What kind of language?
Really inflammatory stuff. Headlines like Anarchy's Red Hand, calling the bombing the bloody fruit of anarchist ideas, describing the suspects as bloody brutes, red ruffians, dynamarchists, even fiends.
Wow, fiends. That kind of coverage makes any rational discussion impossible, doesn't it? Just pure demonization.
Exactly. It created this climate of intense fear and prejudice, and you saw the effect immediately on groups like the Knights of Labor. Powderly's reaction makes perfect sense in that context. They felt enormous pressure to condemn the violence, distance themselves completely from the anarchists, call their tactics self-defeating. They had to protect themselves.
But even then, there were other theories floating around about who really threw the bomb, right? Not everyone just accepted the official story.
No, definitely not. A lot of workers, and some others too, suspected it might have been a setup. Maybe agents, provocateur spies hired by the companies, maybe even the Pinkertons.
The Pinkertons were notorious for that kind of thing, infiltrating unions, breaking strikes violently.
Exactly. Albert Parsons himself strongly believed it was a conspiracy by the monopolists, maybe planned in New York, carried out by Pinkerton agents, specifically to smash the 8-hour movement and frame the radical leaders.
So right from the start, you have these two totally opposing narratives. The official line, anarchist conspiracy, and the labor counter-narrative, a provocation by capital to crush the movement.
And that fundamental disagreement, that fight over the story, carried right into the trial that followed. The police and prosecutors just assumed it was an anarchist plot, and their job was to prove it.
How did they go about building that case? What evidence did they focus on?
Well, the raids were key, especially hitting the Arbeiterzeitung office. They arrested spies, Michael Schwab, Adolf Fischer. They found that revenge poster that had called for workers to arm themselves after the McCormick shootings. And a really crucial search was at Louis Ling's place.
Ling was known as an anarchist bomb maker, right?
Yes. And at his place, they found bombs, bomb-making supplies. His landlord, a guy named William Seliger, ended up cooperating with the police, became a key witness, and testified that Ling made bombs.
And did they try to connect Ling's bombs specifically to the one thrown at Haymarket?
They did. Police investigators said they did chemical analysis, claimed the lead from the Haymarket bomb casing matched lead found at Ling's place, and that a metal nut and some other fragments from the Haymarket bomb were similar to parts used in bombs Ling was known to make.
Okay, so they're building a physical link to Ling, but the prosecution's case went wider than just Ling, right? Since they never actually proved who threw the bomb.
Exactly. The core of the prosecution's argument was conspiracy. They said there was this group of anarchist leaders inciting violence, encouraging attacks on the police, and that whoever threw the bomb was acting as part of this larger plot, inspired or directed by the leaders on trial. They claimed Ling built the bomb, and guys like Spies, Fisher, Schwab were all part of the conspiracy, even if they didn't physically throw it. They had witnesses trying to link them to helping the bomber.
And Albert Parsons, even though he wasn't scheduled to speak and arrived late, he was one of the main defendants. Who were the others on trial?
8 men in total were indicted and tried. Besides Parsons and Ling, there was August Spies, Adolf Fischer, George Engel, Michael Schwab, Samuel Fielden, and Oscar Neebe.
Parsons wrote about the trial in his autobiography. How did he describe it?
With absolute fury and contempt. He called it a travesty on justice, said the laws, both national and state laws, were just thrown out the window in response to the clamor of the capitalist class. He felt the verdict was decided before the trial even started, blaming the capitalist newspapers who called for our blood.
He saw it purely as class warfare, not a real trial.
Completely. He used terms like class jury, class law, class hate, and maybe the most shocking claim he made was that the jurors themselves admitted, under oath during selection, that they were already prejudiced against the defendant's anarchist beliefs.
They admitted prejudice beforehand.
According to Parsons, yes. So for him, they weren't convicted for bombing or conspiracy based on evidence. They were convicted for their opinions, for their speeches. He also claimed the jury was treated incredibly well during the trial, wined and dined, entertained, and even alleged there was talk of a $100,000 reward from rich millionaires if they delivered a guilty verdict. Said the jurors were lionized afterwards.
That claim about prejudice and the quote he attributes to the prosecution, it's chilling.
Parsons quotes the prosecutor as saying something like, "These 8 men were picked out because they were the leaders. They are no more guilty than the thousands of their associates. We ask you to convict them and make examples of them." Parsons saw this as proof positive that the trial wasn't about finding the bomber. It was about silencing dissent by executing the leaders.
And the verdict reflected that goal, essentially.
Pretty much. All 8 found guilty. 7 of them, Parsons, Spies, Fisher, Engel, Lang, Schwab, Fielden sentenced to hang. Oscar Neebe got 15 years in prison. Later, the sentences for Schwab and Fielden were commuted to life imprisonment by the governor.
How did people react to the verdict? Was it universally accepted?
Not at all. It was just as polarizing as the bombing itself. Around the world, especially in Europe, there was huge outrage. Protests, demonstrations. The defendants became martyrs for the international labor movement. But here in the U.S., public opinion was largely driven by fear and anger, whipped up by the press, calling them bloodthirsty foreigners, and by sensational books like the one written by the lead police investigator, Captain Schick, called Anarchy and Anarchists.
Captain Schick. Wasn't his investigation later questioned?
Yes, there were questions. Schick was actually dismissed from the force later on, though he got reinstated amid allegations he might have fabricated some evidence. And that core issue remains: who actually threw the bomb? Historians like Joll and Messer Cruz point fingers at Rudolf Schnaubelt, who was related to Schwab and fled the city. They argue, how can you have a legitimate conspiracy trial convicting people for an act when the main actor, the bomber, is never identified or tried?
So, later historians often still see the trial as fundamentally flawed because the central crime wasn't solved. But you mentioned there are other historical takes. Not everyone sees it as a total frame-up.
Right, it's complex. Timothy Messer Cruz, who went through the trial transcripts extensively, argues that while it had flaws by today's standards, maybe it was fair for its time. He thinks there was compelling evidence linking the accused to the bombing and to a wider network advocating violence. He says critics sometimes ignore what's actually in the transcripts and forget that trials back then relied way more on witness testimony than physical evidence like DNA today.
So, maybe flawed, but not necessarily a complete sham according to that view.
That's one interpretation. Another view, from historian John Teaford, puts it bluntly. The tragedy of Haymarket is the American justice system did not protect the damn fools who most needed that protection. It is the damn fools who talk too much and too wildly who are most in need of protection from the state. Basically suggesting their own radical talk made them targets, and the system failed to protect their right to that speech, even if it was inflammatory.
Wow. So many ways to look at it. A politically motivated injustice, a flawed but maybe understandable process for the time, or a failure to protect even unpopular speech. It really shows how contested this history still is.
Absolutely. And all these debates lead up to the final tragic act, the executions.
But before the main executions, Louis Ling died. How did that happen?
Yeah, the day before he was scheduled to be hanged, Ling died in his cell. The official story is suicide. Apparently, he detonated a blasting cap, like a small explosive device used for dynamite that had been smuggled into him, holding it in his mouth. A really gruesome end.
And then November 11th, 1887, the 4 others were hanged.
Engel, Fisher, Parsons, and Spies. The sources describe them walking to the gallows, dressed in white robes, singing the Marseillaise, the French Revolutionary song. Their families were nearby, including Lucy Parsons, Albert's wife.
Lucy Parsons. Albert called her grandest, noblest, bravest of women in his writing. She was an activist too, wasn't she?
Very much so. A major figure in her own right in anarchist and labor circles for decades after. On the day of the execution, she tried to see Albert one last time, and the police actually arrested her and her children, searched them for bombs. Just adding another layer of cruelty to the whole thing.
What about their last words? Did they get to say anything?
They did. August Spies famously said something like, "The time will come when our silence will be more powerful than the voices you strangle today." Engel and Fisher shouted, "Hurrah for anarchism!" Parsons tried to speak, started saying, "Will I be allowed to speak?" But the trapdoor opened before he could finish.
And the execution itself? The sources say it wasn't quick?
No, apparently the drop wasn't calculated correctly. They didn't die instantly from broken necks. They strangled slowly, which reportedly horrified even the people who came to watch.
A brutal end. And still, after all that, the person who actually threw the bomb was never caught and never tried, which just reinforces the questions about the whole conspiracy case.
Yeah, exactly. The bomber remains unknown. Schnaubelt is often suspected. Others like George Schwab or George Meng were mentioned, and Parsons always maintained it was a Pinkerton agent. That mystery hangs over the whole affair.
So what was the fallout, the long-term impact of Haymarket? Did it crush the labor movement?
Well, in the immediate aftermath, yeah, it was a huge blow. Like Parsons said, the 8-hour movement was basically broken down. The momentum just vanished. Employers pushed back hard, got those longer workdays back, and the anti-union feeling was intense.
But it wasn't totally destroyed. The sources suggest maybe it was more complicated than that, some resilience.
Surprisingly, yes. Despite the crackdown, union activity didn't just disappear. One source mentioned Chicago workers actually uniting more afterwards. A labor party was formed in Chicago and had some success. And get this, the Knights of Labor membership in Chicago, Powderly's group actually doubled after Haymarket, hitting 40,000.
Doubled after all that negative association.
Seems counterintuitive, right? But maybe the perceived injustice of the trial and executions actually motivated people to organize, even within the more conservative Knights. Chicago's Labor Day parade that year was apparently the biggest in the country. And you even had establishment figures like Senator Stanford talking about worker co-ops as an alternative to the conflict.
That resilience is pretty remarkable. It shows the underlying issues weren't going away.
Not at all. And Haymarket had a profound impact on certain individuals, changing their whole outlook. Maybe none more so than Eugene V. Debs.
Ah, Debs. The source on him shows an incredible transformation. He started out pretty anti-strike, didn't he?
Completely anti-strike. After those big 1877 railroad strikes, Debs, who was then a leader in the Locomotive Firemen's Union, a craft union, was appalled. He actually said strikes meant anarchy and revolution, that they'd destroy order. He believed in negotiating, in arbitration. He genuinely thought if workers just proved their worth, bosses would treat them fairly.
That sounds naive, given what we know about the Gilded Age.
Yeah, reality hit him hard. He saw firsthand that bosses would cut wages, would exploit workers no matter how valuable they were. His early faith just didn't hold up. He also got incredibly frustrated with the different railroad unions always fighting separately, never uniting against the powerful railroad companies.
But eventually, he came around to seeing strikes as necessary.
He did. His own union dropped its no-strike rule in 1885. By 88, he was calling strikes a weapon of the oppressed, even if he still preferred negotiation. But the real turning points were seeing other big strikes get brutally crushed, like Homestead Steel in 92, with the Pinkertons and militia, or the Coeur d'Alene miners' strike broken by federal troops. After seeing that, he was fully convinced. What is a strike, he wrote? War, resistance to wrong.
And his frustration with the old craft unions, the ones that wouldn't unite or support each other, led him to make a big break.
A huge break. He quit his own union, the BLF, in 92 after they failed to support a strike in Buffalo. He just ripped into the old brotherhoods and their leaders, like Samuel Gompers of the AFL, for being too timid, too divided, too willing to cut deals. He hated the AFL model of organizing only skilled workers, leaving out the unskilled and often black workers too. He saw Gompers cozying up to big business in groups like the National Civic Federation as a betrayal, undermining the very basis of the labor movement. He basically said, I'm done with this old way.
And that led him to start his own different kind of union.
Exactly. The American Railway Union, the ARU, founded in 1893. This was an industrial union trying to organize all railroad workers together, engineers, firemen, switchmen, track layers, everybody, into one powerful union.
Was it successful?
Amazingly successful at first. Signed up 150,000 members in its first year, way more than all the old brotherhoods combined. And they won a big strike against the Great Northern Railroad, showed their power.
But then came the Pullman strike in 1894. That seems to be the defining moment for Debs.
Absolutely pivotal. The ARU backed the workers striking against the Pullman Company, which made luxury train cars. And the response was overwhelming. Debs saw the whole system line up against them. The press, the courts issuing injunctions to stop the strike, the police, the state militia, and finally President Cleveland sending in federal troops, all working hand in glove with the railroad owners. And he saw the AFL and the old craft unions mostly stand back or even help break the strike.
That must have been a brutal lesson in power politics.
It was his conversion moment. He said later, in the gleam of every bayonet and the flash of every rifle, the class struggle was revealed. He got thrown in jail for defying the court injunction, and he called that experience his first practical lesson in socialism.
And after Pullman, he was fully committed to socialism.
No turning back. By 1897, he's declaring, the issue is socialism versus capitalism. I am for socialism because I am for humanity. He becomes the leading voice for socialism in America, co-founds the Socialist Party in 1901.
What was his vision of socialism? Was it very theoretical?
Less theoretical, more deeply felt, based on his experiences. He talked about a commonwealth of labor, a cooperative society, ending class conflict, bringing freedom and brotherhood. He saw himself as speaking for the working class, not to them as some intellectual. He wanted unity, believed socialism would become obvious to people through struggle and argument, kind of osmosis, he called it.
Though the source mentions maybe a weakness there, in the theory part.
Yeah, Mike Davis is quoted saying, Debs, while passionate, wasn't always deep on theory, maybe didn't fully grasp the complexities of how capitalism worked, how crises happened. He led with his heart, which was powerful, but maybe sometimes lacked a detailed roadmap.
But he was very clear on needing both political action and union strength.
Oh, absolutely. You couldn't just vote socialism in, he argued. You had to build power in the workplaces, too. Industrial democracy, he called it. His slogan was, vote as you strike and strike as you vote. And he was skeptical of just having the government own industries if the capitalists still controlled the government. That wasn't real change for workers.
He ran for president as a socialist multiple times, right?
Yeah.
Became a really prominent national figure.
5 times. His peak was probably 1912, riding the red special train across the country, getting almost 1 million votes. But the Socialist Party had its own internal fights, moderate wing versus radical wing. And sadly, the sources note some prominent socialists, like Victor Berger, held racist or anti-immigrant views, which definitely wasn't Debs's position, but hurt the party.
And Debs himself remained pretty radical, even clashing with the AFL again later.
Yeah, he got involved with the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, the Wobblies. They were trying to build that one big union for everyone, challenging the AFL's craft model. But the IWW faced incredible resistance from employers, from the government, even sabotage from the AFL, and they struggled to build lasting power, partly because they refused to sign contracts. Debs also supported revolutions abroad, seeing the Bolsheviks in Russia as a possible model.
Which led to his famous anti-war speech during World War I.
The Canton, Ohio speech in 1918. The U.S. was in the war, patriotism was high, dissent was suppressed. But Debs spoke out, denouncing the war profiteers, expressing solidarity with Lenin and Trotsky. That's where he gave that famous line, "When I rise, it will be with the ranks and not from the ranks," always identifying with the common worker.
And that speech got him arrested for sedition. His trial produced maybe his most famous quote ever.
Charged under the Espionage Act, basically for speaking against the war. In court, he gave this incredibly moving statement ending with, "While there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it. While there is a soul in prison, I am not free." Just perfectly capturing his lifelong solidarity with the underdog.
What a journey. From that cautious union official horrified by strikes in 1877 to this icon of American socialism willing to go to prison for his beliefs, Haymarket and the struggles that followed clearly shaped him profoundly.
Undeniably. And speaking of Haymarket's legacy, there's one more really direct global consequence we should mention.
You mean May Day?
Exactly. The first International Workers' Day, May 1st, 1890. The date was chosen specifically to honor the struggle for the 8-hour day and, crucially, to commemorate the Haymarket martyrs. It became this huge annual event, demonstrations all over the world, a direct legacy of what happened in Chicago in 1886.
That's incredible. An event meant to crush radical labor ends up inspiring a global day of worker solidarity.
It really shows the power of martyrdom, doesn't it? And the resonance of that fight for basic rights.
So summing up this deep dive, we've traced this path from the huge economic shifts and inequalities of the Gilded Age through the different ways workers tried to respond, the cautious craft unions, Powderly's Knights trying for peaceful mass organization, Parsons and the anarchists with their revolutionary vision.
Then the collision at Haymarket, the explosion, the controversial trial, the executions.
And the aftermath, the immediate backlash, yes, but also the resilience, the radicalization of people like Debs, and ultimately May Day.
We've seen these different strategies for change negotiation, politics, direct action, revolution, all existing at the same time, all facing fierce opposition. And we've seen how the story itself, the narrative of what happened and why, was contested right from the start and remains contested today.
It really underscores that Haymarket wasn't just a riot. It was this critical moment that laid bare the raw conflict between labor and capital, the high stakes involved in the fight for rights and power back then.
So what are the big takeaways? What lessons can we draw from digging into these sources?
Well, one thing that really stands out is just how difficult and dangerous the fight for even basic workers' rights was. It took incredible courage, and the opposition was immense, often brutal. Progress wasn't just handed over. It was fought for, often at a terrible price.
Yeah, that's definitely clear. And another lesson, I think, is about the power of narrative. Who gets to tell the story? How events get framed, especially by the media and those in power, has a massive impact. You see it so clearly with Haymarket, the bloody anarchist narrative, versus Parsons' own account of his ideas. Controlling the story is controlling the outcome in many ways.
That's a great point. And maybe one final thought to leave listeners with. Think about the tactics and the fears we saw around Haymarket. Trying to paint labor organizers as dangerous foreign radicals, using the press and the state to shut down dissent. Do those things sound familiar at all? How might those historical echoes play out in debates we have today about unions, about inequality, about the power balance between companies and workers?
It's a provocative question. In a world still wrestling with a lot of the same basic issues, fair wages, worker power, the future of work, looking back at struggles like Haymarket with all their complexity and tragedy can feel surprisingly relevant, maybe even a little unsettling.
Definitely unsettling, but important to remember. A lot to think about from this deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explored the Haymarket affair through these fascinating sources.
Absolutely. We hope digging into these different viewpoints has given you a richer, maybe more complicated understanding of this really pivotal moment in American history.